One.
Welcome everybody. Welcome to our Mexican Spirits Tasting Night. Now, I initially pitched this as our Mezcal tasting, but we're kind of covering all the bases because we couldn't talk about Mezcal without talking about how it's different from tequila. And we also needed to put in Sotol because Sotol's fascinating and it's very different from Mezcal. But on a certain point, they're also very, very similar to each other. I forgot to mute my phone. They're very similar in a few different ways. So let's talk about why they're similar before we talk about why they're different. We'll all be starting with the Milagro Silver here. We'll get this in our glasses, and we'll start our exploration of Mexican spirits. So, how are they similar? Well, they all broadly start out as a similar beverage. We're going back to the late 1500s and early 1600s. Fermented beverages made from different types of agave were already a thing in Mexico at the time. The native population that lived there actually made a low alcohol, around 3 or 4% fermented beverage called pulque, which they made from the actual local agaves. And they did the same thing up in Chihuahua, and it was actually also just called Sotol. This was kind of their, you could think of it as like an agave-based beer, and you wouldn't be too far wrong. They actually still make it to this day, although I've never seen it exported. It would have had a lot of really powerful agave flavor, but it would have been very soft, very delicate. When the conquistadors came over and, absolutely destroyed Mexico and the Mesoamerican culture, they effectively ran out of brandy. Now, this is where these spirits actually come from. The Spanish were there, and they'd been shipped over a bunch of brandy to, get the soldiers through and get the population of new settlers through. But they couldn't get there fast enough. It had to come over from Spain. So they said, okay, well, fine. We'll buy some grapes. We'll buy some sugarcane. And we'll make our own brandy and our own rum. And the Spanish said, no, we need to tax you on all these spirits we're sending over, so you can't just make your own. You're going to make something out of this agave stuff, go nuts, but no, you're not making your own brandy. You're not making your own rum. You're going to have to just do with what you have, not because you couldn't. You absolutely can, and they do make some absolutely fabulous sparkling wines and brandies in Mexico, and you certainly can make rum there, no problem. Sugarcane grows beautifully in Mexico. But they were told they couldn't. So they take the base ingredient of agave from pulque. It is not true that they simply took the already fermented pulque and they actually just made tequila out of that. That's not true at all. But they created something different to actually do that. And that is true in Sotol, that is true with mezcals, and that is true of tequila. The ingredient is broadly the same. The most familiar plant that most of you are going to be very familiar with that's related to all of the plants that we're making spirits out of here, both agave and the desert spoon here in Sotol, is asparagus. They're all very closely related to asparagus. They all grow over several years in the ground. They're a big succulent plant for the agaves, or a very large root-based dry climate grass in the case of Sotol. They form this core of sugars and water that's underground, and that develops over years and years and years. And what that's for is to actually allow the plant to survive drought. But it's also a very large concentrated portion of simple sugars that can be turned very easily into a distilled spirit. Now, all of the spirits we're tasting tonight are joven, or young. All of these also do come in grades like reposado, which is aged for 2 months up to a year, añejo, which is a year to 3 years, and extra añejo, which is over 3. So you can find reposado mezcal, you can find añejo sotol. Not here so much, but they are things that do exist out there. So let's talk a little bit why they're different as we get ourselves into the Milagro. Now, all tequila is, at its core, mezcal. It's a very specific type of mezcal. You could think of, all of France makes brandy, but it's only cognac if it comes from the cognac region of France. That's true up to a point with tequila. Aaron, are you ready for map cam?
Map cam.
Map cam. Which cam would you like to use? This one right here? All right, so this is the really bad map of Mexico that I printed off at my desk and then colored in with highlighters, but it does the job. Down here is the state of Jalisco, or Jalisco. This is the only state in Mexico that's actually allowed to make tequila and call it tequila. They also only use one particular type of agave. They use the Weber blue agave, or Agave tequilense, so it's only grown here. Everywhere that I've colored in yellow are your Mezcal producing regions. You can't really tell here. This darker colored region is yellow. They do make Mezcal there. Chihuahua and Coahuila, I can't read these upside down, are where Sotol is made. And Durango in stripes there. They make both Mezcal and Sotol. So, yeah, that's not the greatest image in the world, just seeing the video, but yeah, we made it work. It's not bad. We made it work. So, yes, tequila is a type of agave. It is made from only Weber blue agave. And tequila also has kind of an interesting history, at least as a spirit that we're all familiar with. Now, I started here in the year 2000, and you know, the spirits, while broadly hasn't changed too much, it's rye or Canadian whiskey, rum, gin, vodka, tequila, bourbon, brandy, and behind me is scotch. And up to a point, that's still very, very true. But tequila is really a fairly newcomer onto the scene. It's been produced in Mexico since the 15th century, but really it got its major introduction into export markets, particularly the US, during the Second World War, because the refined European spirits that the American public was used to drinking couldn't come over the Atlantic Ocean because of the war. So really just dying for like more distilled spirits, tequila started to trickle into the US market. But it never really got big until the very late 70s and early 80s, when the cocktail was invented in Mexico called the margarita, and the movie Cocktail came out. And all of a sudden, cocktail culture in the US blew up in a way that it hadn't since the 1950s, and tequila was the hot new drink on the block as everybody wanted to try this drink, the margarita. So before about 1981, tequila was, you know, a really specialty beverage that you might see every now and then around. It absolutely was not a mainstream thing until the 1980s, and even then, Jose Cuervo was basically the only kid on the block for that sort of thing. Now, I had some example bottles that I brought up specifically for this. I have no idea what's happened to those. Oh, there they are. I've got them. Let's talk a little bit about our old friend Jose Cuervo while we're talking about this, because there is a real big difference in what you're talking about with tequila. So I'm going to get a little bit of a zoom in on this here, Aaron. It looks so nice, doesn't it? It's from Jalisco, Mexico. Yeah, all tequila legally has to be. It's from blue agave. It's a premium tequila. No. This is what's called a mixto. Just like we talk about a little bit with Canadian whiskey, unless it says on the label 100% blue agave, this can be up to 49% sugarcane spirit, aka just white rum. Now, do I know that this is only 51% agave? No, I don't. But I know it's not 100% because they don't declare it. And if you do make a 100% tequila, you actually have to declare it on the label. It either is or it isn't. And it's not a huge price difference. Like Jose Cuervo, we sell for about $37, and this we sell for like $42. So it's like a $5 difference to get something that's actually what you think tequila should taste like. This is true on the mixto side. I actually went through all our tequilas. The only mixtos we actually keep on the shelf are Olmeca, Jose Cuervo, and Sauza. Sauza was actually the very first export brand before even Jose Cuervo. But everything else we carry. Milagro and El Jimador are the least expensive of the 100% agaves that we carry, at least. And I just like the Milagro slightly more than the El Jimadors. I just think they're slightly nicer. So, how is this made? How are most of these made? Well, you take a agave plant. For Weber Blue Agave, it's about an 8-year-old plant, and you dig up this root core out of the ground. The jimadors basically go through with more or less a very sharp shovel, and they cut all of those big succulent leaves off of it. They look very much like a giant aloe plant, and they cut all of those big spiky leaves off. They take that, they bring it into the distillery, and they put it in an oven and they roast it. And what this roasting process does is it breaks down some of the more complex sugars into simple sugars and caramelizes them a little tiny bit to add a bit of sweetness. After that's done, they crush it down. Traditionally, they would use tahona, which is basically a big lava rock wheel that runs in a channel like your ground. If you're thinking like a millstone, you've pretty much got it. It's a millstone. Some smaller producers, especially mezcal producers, do still use a tahona. Patron actually launched a more premium series of tequilas, which I no longer carry because no one bought them. But they were actually 100% tahona milled. But these days, they basically throw it through a giant industrial chipper, which breaks it down. They mix it with a little bit of water. They add cultured yeast for tequila, including an inoculant or basically a yeast booster. That actually means that the tequila will finish fermenting in about 30 hours to 3 days. It goes through a distillation process. Your big commercial tequilas, they'll be using a column still. Smaller tequilas, they will usually use a pot still. Also, unique to Mexico, there's a lot of first distillation in pot still, second in column, just because it results in a very pretty spirit. So that's in very broad strokes how they've made this. I will refer back to that when we talk about mezcal and how each of these is made. It's only distilled twice. There have been some triple distilled tequilas that have been made over the years. None of them have done very well. I think it strips out too much of the flavor. Okay. Oh yeah, what year did Margaritaville come out by Jimmy Buffett? Because yeah, Craig's like, did Jimmy Buffett like help tequila sales?
It's possible.
Yeah, 75-ish, you think? So yeah, that probably really did help. And the fact that that song exists is really a testament to just how big margaritas became when they first came out. Tequila was a bit of a revelation to the market in kind of the late 70s, early 80s, because it was something new. It was so different. There were always fun cocktails we can make with it. It was a very, very popular thing. Students can make the maps. Yes, they'd be much better if your students made the maps. Yeah, let's start running through this a little bit. And hamburger hats. Awesome. Okay, so why are we starting with the tequila? Because it's what most people are familiar with, but I also don't know how many people have ever had a silver tequila that was 100% agave straight. Because if I'd told you that this was just a mezcal, and again, I'll reiterate, it kind of is, this isn't a terrible mezcal. Now, this is roasted in an oven. Actually, a lot of these big distilleries now will use something very similar to a pressure cooker, and they'll actually steam cook the agave hearts, or they're actually called piñas because they look like pineapples. The big reason that this isn't quite so smoky, as we'll get into with these, one of the big differences with mezcal production is they take all of those piñas and they put them in a big hole in the ground and they light them on fire and then they cover them over with dirt, and they basically create a dirt oven or a clay oven in the ground to roast the piñas. And it takes about 3 days rather than just a few hours. And they actually get a much smokier, richer flavor because of that underground roasting process. Now the spirit itself is bright and fresh and clean. I get limes, I get grapefruit, I get a little bit of tropical fruit. I get that indescribable, oddly sake-esque note that's just classic agave that, again, you get right, even if you use like agave nectar sweetener, which my wife occasionally uses for her tea, you get some of that too. It's so bright and cheerful. Now, why I love silver tequila and why a lot of people don't drink it straight is silver tequila is in many ways a mixing tequila. If you use something like a añejo or use even a reposado in, say, a margarita, well, what's in a margarita? Lime juice and triple sec and ice. You want these bright, fresh, clean, tropical notes to translate through the lime and elevate the whole drink. If you're adding in woody notes and earthy notes coming from the barrel, that doesn't work all that well with the lime. There is absolutely there is a place for mixed drinks made with aged tequilas, but in your simple drinks like palomas and margaritas, even tequila sunrises, they don't work well. You want this bright, fresh, clean character, which works so well. Now, if you're coming to this from the world of Scotch, you're going to be missing the barrel character. This is going to be very much more like drinking a high-end gin neat, or spoiler warning, we're doing grappa in not too long from now for one of these spirits tastings. It's very much like a grappa to me, except without that incredible oily weight that I get out of grappas. But I'm having this slightly warmer than room temperature because of the hot lights, and I'm perfectly content to drink this neat. Would I be perfectly content to drink the world's cheapest mixto that I bought at the duty-free store at, Coots? Probably not. But this, straight up, beautiful drinking spirit. And yes, mezcal cocktails absolutely can be quite fab. No question there. Okay, so to very quickly sum up the differences, this is, at its core, a type of mezcal. It is only made from one particular type of agave, and it is made, the roasting process happens in a much more industrial process. So let's contrast that with mezcal. Now mezcal is made in all of the places on the map that I colored yellow. But in particular, we're going to be talking about the region of Oaxaca way down here. About 90% of the world's mezcal is made in Oaxaca. Now there are other regions, like up in Michoacan, they actually make very mezcal-like drinks, but those don't actually, they're not part of the protected appellation for mezcal, so they actually are not allowed to use the name. There may be more regions added onto the list that are allowed to use that, but at the moment, it's just the 6 states in Mexico. Now, just like 90% of mezcal comes from Oaxaca, 90% of mezcal is made from the Espadin type of maguey or agave. Maguey, you will see a lot, is the Mexican term for a single species of agave. If you wanted to think of these as being like the differences between Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot, it's not quite the same, but you're on the right track. 90% of all mezcals is made from Espadin, purely because it is by far the easiest to grow. Some of the varieties that we'll talk about, like there's only 2 places in the world that have actually learned how to farm Tobala, and the, whatever it's called, Texacate, I believe is the really, really hard one. It takes 30 years to grow a single plant, and they've never found a way to actually propagate it in like a farm setting, whereas Espadin is reasonably easy to grow, to the point where, well, this is a example. Every one of the mezcals we'll be tasting tonight does actually declare the type of maguey on the label. We carry 2 that don't, and this is one of the 2. If it doesn't say, it's definitely Espadin, because 90% of if it was something different, they could charge more for it. So if it doesn't say, it is Espadin. But that is not in any way to say that Espadin is a bad type of agave. There's a reason that they use it for 90%. Now, I have 2 sets of tasting notes on these. After the wine tasting 2 nights ago, I actually took tasting notes on all of these afterwards. And then this last night and this morning, I also took a whole bunch more notes on all of the different products, their history and growing times and everything else. So I have 2 things. So if you see me flipping back and forth here a little bit, there's going to be that. Espadin is also known as Agave augustifolia. It's also the direct ancestor of Weber Blue Agave, which comes to tequila, which is why we're going from here to here. It's kind of, child to parent here. There's about a 7 to 9 year ripening time here on the Espadin. No surprise, it's so close to the 8 years on Weber Blue Agave. And this is distilled twice in copper stills. This is a bit of a shame, actually. One of the really neat things about Mezcal and Sotol is it's very often distilled on clay stills. And Mezcal Koch and Bruxo both make mezcals that do come off clay stills. Just the ones that we're tasting tonight, unfortunately, do not. They are all off copper. So, wow, there's a bit of a difference between tequila and mezcal here. It's honestly a giant difference, considering that they're, in theory, very similar drinks. I get mesquite, campfire, like clean wood smoke. Their website says sweet fruit, coconut, herbs, and spices. Not in this glass it doesn't, but all right. What did I get when I actually took formal tasting notes on last week? I got earth, smoke, oregano, dust and sand, wax, bacon, cured meat, a little bit of like vegetal, maybe basilic notes. I do get that bright, clean, pretty agave note, but it's way in the back. The kind of the selling feature of the Milagro here, the bright fruit and agave, is kind of buried under all the earthy, smoky, waxy, savory notes of the mezcal. And yeah, it's subtle. It's got a lot going on. You could add a drop of water to this. It will change. I didn't think to bring a water pitcher, so I won't. It's very, very, very pretty. And this is the most common type. Koch is really interesting as well. This is probably the line of mezcals that we carry the most of. These guys were actually started in 1998, basically as a mezcal advocacy board, not to help the world sell more mezcal, but to basically prevent the increasing popularity of mezcal in the broader market from ruining mezcal. They basically didn't want there ever to be like a Jose Cuervo or Sauza of mezcal. They didn't want mixto mezcals to become a thing, and they aren't actually. They basically started out as a mezcal advocacy and protection organization, and they have developed into a brand that makes single variety mezcals. Yeah, Oaxaca does usually serve mezcal with a little bit of orange slices, so you don't get the wedge of lime and lick of salt. I'm not really going to touch on the worm, other than the fact that I did a lot of reading about the worm, and there's a bunch of different theories. The most popular one, and the one that I believe the most, is that the worm was purely a marketing gimmick to set it apart from tequila, to give bar owners like a reason that it would be different. I actually disagree with you on the water, Craig. I kind of like it more without, because I think it's opening up to more like a mineral sort of place. It's a very mineral oil sort of thing. And I definitely get more like beeswax candles with the water. But I think it kills some of the savory, salty mesquite notes that I was really digging on it. Yeah, agree to disagree. I liked this neat. But that's your mileage may vary. This is still wonderful with water. Now, there are about 30 different types of agaves used to make different mezcals. As I said, Espadin is about 90% of them. The other 29 types plus combined make up the other 10%. So they are not super, super common. We're doing, I think, what's considered one of the most interesting and certainly one of the more desirable ones in Tobala, and also one of the most esoteric in Madrecuishe. Because these are a wide different variety of, closely related, siblings of asparagus, they're not all the same. Like Espadin, I spent an odd amount of time looking at pictures of agave plants doing this. Espadin broadly looks very, very much like blue agave. They don't look desperately different. Technically, Madrecuishe, I guess, is a succulent. It looks a lot more like just a wild grass, and it has a trunk, which is unusual. I mean, these are low, bushy plants. They're very large, low, bushy plants. They're kind of like if you put an aloe out in your backyard and it went absolutely nuts and turned into the size of like a small pine tree. These almost more look like palm trees because they have a very distinct trunk to them, which is just so wild to me. This is a fairly uncommon type of agave for them to make mezcal from because it's a bit of an esoteric style. Because it has this big, long trunk, the characteristic, it loses some of that wood smoke. It loses some of that kind of immediately likable tropical fruit characteristic. It's very kind of woodsy. It's very mineral oil. It can be a little floral. The first time I went through these, I actually liked this the least. I've gone through this about 3 times since I first opened these when we first started filling bottles about 10 days ago. I think this is edging up on being my favorite now because it's so light and so delicate, and definitely a beer on the side. Beer on the side is essential. I'm not doing it because, professionalism, which I hope everyone who's witnessed last year knows how much of a joke that is. But yeah. I love this. I get like bacon as like my lead note on this. Bacon and I've referenced this particular aroma before, but when I was growing up, my best friend's dad hunted all the time, and I have a very vivid kind of sensory memory of like the smell of a fresh deer like hanging in a garage. This reminds me of venison in that way. I think the smoke's a little cleaner. Like I don't get that kind of dank, rich smoke. I get a very clean wood smoke, almost like cedar. I get some aniseed, well, maybe not aniseed, maybe more like fennel, like a muted sort of licorice, peppery. Ooh, there's something a little medicinal in here as well. Kind of reminds me, in a very good way, of aspirin. I'm a very weird person who occasionally chews aspirin because I actually like the taste. This has a little of that. Shut up, Aaron. Oh, this is the one that I could just smell all night. I absolutely love the Madrecuishe. What else did I take for notes on this guy? This particular example is wild harvested. Most of the Madrecuishe that you actually get is wild harvested, just because it's fairly obscure and nobody really knows what it is. There's no market for like cultivating it, and when agave cutters go out into the desert to actually like hunt down plants, they'll walk right by these looking for wild Espadin, or like especially the rare ones like Tobala. They'll walk right by this because it's not considered like a particularly sellable type of agave. In terms of maturation time, this is also a fairly slow maturing agave, not as long as the 30 years of like the really rare ones, but 12 years. 12 years to actually finish maturing to the point where you can make mezcal out of it. Well, we are burning through these. We are 3 in and it's not even half past the hour. Now, part of that is my very admitted not being terribly familiar with these spirits. I did a ton of research for this. I can talk about them intelligently, but like I said, I learned Sotol existed about 2.5 weeks ago, so this is not something that I'm super up on. Although I will say, if any of you remember Sean Vickery, who, when he worked here, he was an absolute mezcal convert. He loved it. He actually was the very first one. We still actually have like pieces of paper explaining what mezcal is in what used to be our tequila section, is now oddly our vodka section, so the sign's making no sense. But yeah, he had like a whole mezcal explainer that he wrote. He absolutely loved mezcal, and he's actually the reason we carry as much of it as we do. Our needlessly too large grappa section, that's all on me. That's my thing. Our needlessly large mezcal section we rarely sell anything out of, that was Sean. And he was absolutely right. These are absolutely fabulous. Okay, let's jump into Tobala. I don't know if you're going to get it because you're drinking out of the glass, and I haven't gotten this aroma out of the glass at all. But I am getting like caramel bar levels of milk chocolate right out of the neck of this. And that's not something I expected at all. I have not gotten milk chocolate out of this at any point that I've tasted it. I get it out of the neck only. But that's super interesting. Okay, Tobala. Now, a lot of the articles that I read called this the king of the agaves. It's certainly one of the most difficult. It has a really cute name, agave potatorum, because they're little tiny agaves. To actually get the same amount of weight as you need on Espadin or Madrecuishe or Weber Blue, you need 8 to 10 actual cores of Tobala. And it's also one of the very few agaves that doesn't reproduce asexually. So when you dig out a 8-year-old Espadin or a 12-year-old Madrecuishe, it's already sent out suckers or hijuelos that basically have established, smaller baby plants all around it. Espadin is particularly good for this. It sends out a ton of them, which is another reason it's so widely propagated, is it has lots of these little things. Tobala doesn't. It only reproduces by seeds, and only if those seeds actually are spread by birds or bats that eat them. This is not something that you actually can farm. There are a couple of people who have managed it, but only by actually encouraging bat colonies on their property and encouraging their actual plants to flower before they actually harvest. One of the really interesting parts that I learned is humidors will actually go out during like flowering season for the patch of desert or patch of woods that they actually harvest from, and they'll cut off the flowering stalk of these because once they flower, they die. So they actually have to go out and prevent the plant from actively flowering, whereas with Tobala, they have to leave some of the crop to actually flower, otherwise there won't be any more Tobala because they only come from seed. Oh, this is so different. So tiny little plants, they take about 15 years to actually mature, and then even then they get an eighth to a tenth the actual volume you get of the others. Really difficult to cultivate wild. It really prefers to grow actually at the base of wild oak trees. It has some sort of relationship with oaks. Interestingly, one of the things I found fascinating about this, does it actually say for this one what it is? Would have been much more interesting for all of you if I'd looked this up before, but I didn't. No, it doesn't. But a lot of producers will actually label their Tobalas Tobala Chino or Tobala Orejon. Chinos are Tobalas that spend their life growing in the sun, and Orejons are ones that are grown in forests or in the shade. And apparently they're so different that they've actually started labeling them differently. And whereas these I found very herbal, very sharp, very smoky, very in your face, maybe I'm just used to the smoke. Maybe if I came to this fresh, I'd find it very smoky. But all I'm getting now is how soft this is, so delicate this is. It's so pretty. What did I say a week ago when I tasted these blind? Well, I did not know at the time, I will say. I found out last night that these were all related to asparagus. What was my number one tasting note for Tobala? Pickled asparagus. So, not to blow my own horn here, but I did actually call that right away.
Where's pickled asparagus?
Right where my fingertip is.
Oh, just wait. There it is.
There we go. Pickled asparagus. Nailed it. Okay. Oh, well, you'll just have to take my word for it. Yeah. I got celery. I got something very oddly koji-ish, limestone, pears, maybe mint. I was surprised how delicate and soft this was. I'm very interested to see if this is everyone's favorite or if everyone's like, yeah, I'd rather have the tequila. Oh, and in the mouth, kaboom. Like this smells like it's gonna be so soft, so delicate. You get in the mouth and it just goes off like a firecracker. There's the smoke, there's the pepper, there's all those herbaceous green herbal notes like oregano. There's the basil. And the smoke's so different. Like the smoke here almost comes off a little bit Lafroig or Ardbeg, that green peaty smoke. It's not peat, but it's a green wood smokiness. It's a slightly dirty smoke that I'm really grooving on here. It starts with these pretty notes like chocolate and cherries, and then it immediately dives into like green, woody, weedy smoke that just, I don't know, I really like the contrast. Has a kick, but not your favorite? Fair enough. This one grew on me. Not as much as this did, but this grew on me with time. He's sorry, folks. I got a situation over here. You're missing the mezcal tasting?
Yeah, I found like a week or two ago.
And we just missed yours?
Yeah.
You can have my heels. Aaron, give the men these bottles, no charge. I can't give you a Sotol because I literally only have enough for my tasting, but you're free to whatever's left in these because that's our mistake. Nope, but he's going to get plenty, so.
All right, take them away. How are you going to do it?
Bake them away, toys.
Here. Oh, my God.
Yeah, soapy too. I'm trying to give these all their due because I realize it's not that interesting to watch me like slowly sip a tiny glass of spirits, but I really do want to give these their own due because they really deserve it. The Bruxo brand, which was the bottle that was sitting here, I was really struggling to find anything. They have an Instagram account, but they don't actually have a website. I saw some like reviews of them that kind of gave the exact same like marketing blurb about who they are and what they do, but it was all the same, and it broadly was just the most like generic, like, yes, we really respect local producers and make our stuff in an artisanal way, and it's the same thing every bloody mezcal producer says. So the website effectively said nothing. If anyone has better information on Bruxo, by all means chime in, but yeah. Okay, let's talk about what we got coming up in the next couple of weeks. I hope Victor enjoys his mezcals. Sorry again for forgetting your set. I don't know how that happened, but I think we got you some. We got you 4 out of the 5. Okay, let's move on to Wednesday night. We are going to be joined by Patrick Schnarr, head brewmaster and founder of Outcast Brewing out of Calgary, and we're going to taste 4 of his beers. We're going to taste his dry lager, which totally isn't a lager. We're going to taste his Rumpel Stout Skin Breakfast Stout. I did some reading on this. He actually barrel ages his coffee beans. Now, I have to know how that goes. So that's going to be an interesting question to ask him. And then 2 versions of his Forgetful Brewer Double IPA, the standard, which is year-round, and the pineapple, which is a seasonal. So that's coming up Wednesday night. Patrick's only going to be here for about half the tasting. As he described it, 6 to 7 is when he feeds his kids, and his wife would never forgive him if he spent the whole time drinking beer. So we're going to have him on for about half the tasting. For wine tasting next week, this is one I'm really excited for, and it's got a little bit of a story. This is iteration 4, iteration 5 of this. Devin and I really struggled with this because we really wanted to do a wine called La Limiere for this, from the south of France by Val de Combre. Fabulous winery, fabulous wine. We ended up buying the last few cases in Alberta, but we couldn't get enough to actually do the tasting. And that was supposed to be our showpiece wine. So we said, okay, well, we can't get Val de Combre. Okay, cool. What else do we do? We knew we were doing this Syrah by Alain Jaume. We knew we were going to do an Australian Shiraz. We settled on Heartland. Okay, what else are we going to do? So we tried the Intelligo Syrah in South Africa. There was none of that available. We tried one other wine. None of that. Finally settled on the Craven Fairs, which we initially weren't going to do because it's a $37 bottle of wine, but it was getting up on $2.30, which is our order cutoff, and we had to find something. So we bit the bullet and we made the tasting $85, and we just said, okay, well, we're not going to make a ton of money on this, but I'm really happy with the tasting. It's a really high quality tasting at the end of the day because A, we had to fight for it, and B, we kind of had to compromise. We've had Craven on in a sense. These are the same folks who are part of the partnership that makes the Clint Pinotage. And then we are going to do the Syrah, which I'm very glad does not say Remillage, because Van de Van makes 2 Syrahs in this price point. They make the Remillage, which spends a whole bunch of time in American oak barrels and kind of tastes like France's answer to Australian Shiraz, and I don't really groove on. They released this 2 years ago. This is our second vintage of it. This is a much more clean, more typically French expression of Syrah. We could not put a North Rhone wine into this. It would be, here's a North Rhone wine and a bottle of Banrock Station. It would be really and truly really hard to do. This drinks like a North Rhone Syrah, even if it isn't. This drinks like a South Rhone. We've got an Australian Shiraz, and then we get into like this super fancy South African. We're going to explore a few different sides of Syrah. It's going to be a really, really interesting tasting. I'm really proud of it for something that Devin and I really struggled to put together. And Craig's right, that pineapple IPA absolutely rules. Okay. So let's jump into the Sotol. Sotol comes from the regions that are marked pink on our map. Specifically, just like with Mezcal, where 90 of it comes from Oaxaca, about 85% of the Sotol in the world comes from the Chihuahua Desert, which is the largest of the bright pink regions. Yes, the largest of the bright pink regions we have here. So this is a related plant. It's still very closely related to asparagus, but it's different from the agave family. There's 6 different variants of this particular type of plant, which I'll just call Desert Spoon for the evening. I have very little of this, so I'll probably be done much before you folks are. So this is a version created from Distillation Leophyllum. That really rolls off the tongue. It's not a succulent, it's a wild grass. It is still 2 times distilled. It is still made off of copper still in this case, although clay is also popular. It is pit roasted, just like Mezcal is, but instead of being put on that tahona, that big piece of lava rock that actually crushes the piñas, which is not optional with Mezcal. You can put it through an industrial shredder if you're a tequila. With Mezcal, tahona is not optional. With this, they actually hack it to pieces with axes and knives, which sounds very satisfyingly visceral and also very cool. Ooh. Okay, there's a reason why I had extra to give Victor of the Mezcals. Myself and everyone here has kept dipping into this. Also, fun thing about the rattlesnake on this, I want to talk a little bit about pechugas or pechugas. They're a very particular type of Mezcal and Sotols. They're effectively spiced variants of the same, where they'll add apples, cinnamons, all sorts of different things into the actual ferment and then distill it. With pechugas traditionally, with Mezcal, they'll basically hang a turkey breast or a duck breast or a chicken breast in the way of the actual distillate coming off the still. It's actually pechuga is Spanish for breast, so they actually run it through breast meat from a bird to actually create this completely bizarre type of Mezcal that's also stupidly expensive. I looked into doing a pechuga for this. The cheapest pechuga, which got horrifyingly bad ratings everywhere else, was like $175. So we didn't do one for obvious reasons. These guys do actually do a pechuga version of a Sotol, but they run it through rattlesnake meat, which seems very on brand for them. Yeah, it's dusty. What did I say initially with this? Because I had a lot to say about this. We've all really liked this. I'll also say this grows on you, by the way. I said this had the best smoke note of any of them. Campfire, celery, lemon, granite, salt, allspice. Really interesting note that's very much almost like Earl Grey tea or black tea. I get like new leather. I get fresh ginger. Oh, in the mouth, it's even better. Yeah, pine's a great call. Yes, thank you, Devin. Old Attic. It is kind of musty, which I like. I like how kind of musty and... Yeah, I mean, dust was what, my 3rd or 4th note on this? Yeah, it has a very ashy character to it. This is literally the only Sotol I've ever had, by the way. I can't tell you if this is, you know, super, super typical or completely atypical. I did do quite a lot of research on this. There's an amazing website, actually, it's called like Mezcal Tasting or something like that. Just look up like Mezcal Tasting Notes and it'll pop right up on Google. They review and have really fascinating information about it. The website's laid out beautifully. Like, you really liked the Tobala, you really like Tobala mezcals, click on the Tobala button, it will just show you everything. It's like, oh, well, Tobala is a wild harvested type of agave. Do you just want to learn about wild harvested agaves? Click the wild button, it will just show those. It was a surprisingly really well put together website, and this scored reasonably well among Sotols. Not at the very top. I can't afford, and they don't import to Alberta, the very top ones, but these did score fairly well. Ooh, he's bringing me a Llanos Sotol. I'm very excited for that. Ooh, Brazil nuts. I'll be honest, I don't know a tasting note for Brazil nut. Yeah, definitely small sips, but this does grow on you. There's so much going on with this. Now, when it comes to rankings, you're going to have more bottles than me. I know the order that I had, which was the tequila, the Espadin, the Madrecuishe, the Tobala, and finally the Sotol. How are we all ranking these? I'm going to have this as my number 2. I kind of spoiled it by saying that the Madrecuishe was my number 1. So for me, I'm going to say 3, 1, 4, 2, 1 for me. Getting something like mangoes on this, the more I spend time with it. Like those really pretty tropical fruit notes that we got in like full form with the Milagro Silver. They're still here, they're just deep down. They're very buried. Yeah, forest soil, like there's something very organic and likable about this immediately. I don't know how I would feel about maybe a more highly ranked one, but I really like this. And no, what you saw, by the way, Grant, where I just gave away all these bottles is someone apparently phoned in last week and booked a kit, but we lost it, or it got lost in the shuffle somehow. That person who came was like, hey, I'm here to pick up my tequila kit that I booked last week, and we didn't have it. They're the ones who ended up with all these bottles, so I definitely don't have spare, so I apologize for that. 51432, fair enough. 13245. Thank you, Elizabeth. Yes, the 3 was really nice. Your temples are now numb. No, not mine. Good. 5, 4, 1, 2, 3. All right, John, that's fair. Craig also is with me on the number 3 being the top of the thing. That's great. By the way, that is not in any way peer pressure. I like when other people agree with me in a very like base human way. Wow, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That is A, fun, and B, that's cool. I also think you got them in descending order of price, so you have fine tastes.
Probably guessed what I'm going to ask you for.
Yeah, that was fun. I don't know if we'll return to this subject imminently, but I certainly learned a ton doing this. I can honestly say that I always do research for these, but you know, some of them, the Syrah one, let's say next week, I'm going to do 90 minutes to 2 hours of research, and that's a low amount. For this, I'm sitting around 5 hours at least of digging into what they are, trying to understand it at like a base level of, okay, well, where do these plants come from? Why are they related? How are they interrelated? Why do they taste different ways? How are they processed in different ways? And it's not just reading it once and writing it down. I refer to my notes probably tonight more than I usually do, but it was just such a new topic to me. It also, I actually did the pre-tasting notes on this for a very specific reason. When you're up here on camera, you're doing kind of 5 things at once. You're checking comments, you're trying to keep the conversation going, you're trying to taste the whiskey, you're trying to think about everything else that's going on. I wanted to have a chance to taste these with absolutely no one else around, where I could taste them in a vacuum and do my own tasting notes in the same way that I did when I did my formal wine training, and just write down everything that I picked up in a completely empty environment, just me and the spirit going through it. That was really, really valuable for me tonight, and that's why actually for the very first time in the entire year-ish that we've been doing this, I actually referred to pre-recorded tasting notes, but they were my own tasting notes.
Nerd.
Thanks. All right, well, that was a lot of fun. Thank you, everyone. I will see you next week for beer on Wednesday, maybe next week for wine on Friday, and if not, well, we have another spirit tasting coming up. Oh, right, yes. By the way, we all know Eric. We all love Eric. If you haven't been in since Wednesday, 14 of our 17 new wine signs for the store are now up and installed. No, I didn't grab one, Aaron. I put it back. But yeah, Eric Dick actually designed all of our new wine signage, and 14 of them are done, and they look absolutely incredible. So if you do want to come in person, if not, again, free delivery, please just take advantage of that. But yeah, we have new Eric Dick designed wine signs for every single one of our wine regions, except for Italy, Spain, and South Africa, because those ones aren't done yet. But everything else is done, and they look absolutely amazing. So yeah, thank you all very much. We will see you for beer next week. Yeah, thanks, Aaron. Have a wonderful night, everybody. Good night.